that energy only becomes something that we convert into problems when we put it into our head and begin to process it in a certain way. And as we process it in certain ways, we tell ourselves, these things are going to get worse, or this is a terrible experience that I'm going through, or my finances are, or I've just had this terrible bout with a disease, or whatever it might be. And all of it is something that we carry around with us. What I'd like you to do sometime is open up the Torah, or the Old Testament, and look at the opening line of the Old Testament, of the Torah. And the opening line of the Torah, these ancient spiritual texts that we all rely upon and live by. And it says, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Most of us have gotten through at least Genesis 1:1, all right? And we understand that. Now you move ahead 31 lines later, and it says, and all that God created was good. Now we're presented with an enormous conundrum, a difficulty in our minds. Everything was created by God, and everything that God created was good. Therefore, how do we ever explain bad? How do we explain evil? How do we explain problems? How do we explain so many of these things that are so much a part of our lives, of our consciousness? You have to see that these are all things that came about when we invented something called the ego. And this ego is nothing more than an idea that we carry around. And this idea that we carry around says that who I am is separate from this source, this perfection into which I was created. That I am separate from it. And as a result of being separate from it, I am what I have, I am what I do, I am what everybody else out there thinks of me, I am my reputation, I am separate from everybody else, and I am separate from God. The other line that came to me in A Course in Miracles, where it uses the word problem, said this: if you do have a problem, the only problem you have is your belief that you are separate from your source. The moment that we took on this idea that we were separate from our source and no longer believed in our own integrity of our own mind, the moment that we took on that, we began to develop something called problems, something called illusions. And I'd like to suggest to you that every problem that we have, the way I see it, is nothing more than a mistake or an illusion. And how do we do something about these mistakes that we have? They are in our minds. You know, it says very clearly in most of the spiritual literature, as a man thinketh, so is he. Emerson, one of the people that we revere, who lived right here in Concord, said that the ancestor to every action is a thought. Once you start to understand that what you think about, your thoughts, is what expands and becomes your life, you start getting real careful about what you think about. Real careful. So that when you have a thought that says, gee, I got a sniffle, it's in my nose, but tomorrow it'll probably be down here in my throat. And on Wednesday, it's probably going to be here in my chest. Always seems to happen this way. And on Thursday, I'm going to have a fever. I get one every time. You can just about count on it. I'm going to have to take Friday off. Now, it's Monday morning, and you got a sniffle, but in your mind, in your thoughts, you're taking Friday off with a fever, and lo and behold, your body begins to react to this thought, which is just a mistake of the intellect to begin with. Supposing that you had a belief system that said 2 + 2 is 7. For some reason, you were just hung up on this idea. And you said 2 + 2 is 7, and you took your calculator and you reformulated it in such a way so that it would appear to be 2 + 2 is 7. And then you tried to balance your checkbook, and you tried to make your life work based upon this formulation, that 2 + 2 is 7. You would find that your life would be out of balance financially virtually all of the time. Every time you push that button and push those numbers, nothing would ever work. So the question is, what do I do in order to correct this mistake in my thinking. And that's where the word solution comes in. But we can't bring the solution in until we understand that everything that we have, do you know that every relationship that you're in right now, every single person watching this, every relationship you're in is in your mind. You can't get behind the eyeballs of another human being and be them. All you can do is process them through your thoughts. Now, if your thoughts about the person that you love are about what is wrong, about what you don't like, about what they ought to be, about what they used to be, about how they disappoint you, about how bad they talk, about their language, about anything at all, if that's what you're thinking about, what you think about is what expands, more of what you're thinking about will continue to show up in your life, whether you like it or not. It's one of the great ironies. I always tell people that if you understood this concept, the best way to do it is to put it in terms of money. If I had $1 million, and I were to take this $1 million and I were to give it to you, and I'd say, this purpose of this $1 million is for you to go out to the mall, and every store you come to where you see something that you really like, you're to purchase it. Any place you go, whatever you like, you purchase it. So you take this $1 million and say, this is great. You walk into the first store that you see, and there's a rug there that's just appalling. It's hideous. It's just awful. It doesn't match anything in your house, and it costs $10,000. And you look at that thing and you say, ugh, I would never want that. Here's $10,000. Send it home. Now you go to the next store in the mall, and it's got a lamp in it that matches the rug, all right? And you look at this hideous lamp and you say, that's the worst looking thing I've ever seen. Send 2 of those home, and they cost $5,000 a piece. So far, you've taken your money and you've spent $20,000 of it on what you don't want. And all day long, every time you saw something that you didn't want, you spent your energy, your money, on sending it home. Then you get home and you say to yourself, why is my house filled with all of this stuff that I don't want? And the answer is, you're crazy. This is called insanity. You have energy to spend it on what you do want, yet you continue to use it to purchase what you don't want. And the metaphor here is that your thoughts work exactly the same way. The energy that you have for creating what you want is in your thoughts. And if you want your relationship to be divine and to be perfect and to be beautiful, then you have to begin to think the kinds of thoughts that are going to create that for you. If, on the other hand, you put your thoughts on what the person isn't, what they ought to be, what they used to be, what you think is wrong, you'll see more of that showing up. And it works in everything in your life. Changing your mind, changing your thoughts is how we change the problems, if you will, that we face in our life. Okay? Now, the word spiritual, there's a spiritual solution to every problem. I am not speaking here about anything that has to do with organized religion or anybody else's religion. I respect everybody's right to worship and be a part of any organization that they choose. And I'm not here to recruit anybody. I don't belong to any organizations. I'm not here trying to convince you to be something other than just a happier, more fulfilled person who can understand that there is a means to bringing a spiritual solution to things in your life that you don't like. These illusions, these mistakes that you have made. Because remember, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and all that was created was good. So that anything that isn't good has come about because of your belief in your mind that you are separate from this divinity. You are not what you have. You are not what you do. You are not what others think of you. You are the beloved. You are the divine. You are a creation that is made into perfection. When I use the word spiritual, I'm speaking now about a way of being. I'm speaking about not being a Buddhist, but being Buddha-like. I'm speaking about not being a Christian, but being Christ-like. I'm speaking about not being a Muslim, but being Muhammad-like. I'm speaking about a way of living which includes specifics, unconditional love, the ability to be able to send love in response to hate, in response to anger, in response to fear, the ability to live that. I'm speaking about the understanding that who I am is not a human being here having a spiritual experience, but it's the reverse. That who I am is really a spiritual being having a human experience. And so there's an infinite part of me. There's a part of me that was never born. There's a part of me that never dies. I've often said that one of the keys to higher awareness is having the ability to step outside of who you are and just become the observer to your life. And when you do that, you tune into the infinite. Carl Jung, one of the greatest teachers, I think, that ever walked on this planet, once said that the telling question of a person's life is their relationship to the infinite. Once you have that relationship to the infinite, I remember I wrote a book a few years ago. It's called Your Sacred Self. And in this book, I talked about the distinction between the ego, this part of us that wants to prove that we're right, and the part of us that wants to be at peace. And a woman came up to me at a talk, and she was one of these people who was going to give me some feedback about my book. And she said, she said, I read your book, and I didn't get anything out of it. I said, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. She said, the only thing I can tell you that I got out of it is that now, after reading it, I no longer have a fear of dying. I said, that's all you got out of one book? This thing that all of us are always in dread of, and you read that? She said, yeah. She said, it just seemed like I understood that I'm an infinite soul after reading that. I said, well, perhaps that was the message that you had to learn, So to me, spiritual means also it means becoming quiet. It means being able to make conscious contact with your source. To no longer have a sense of everything has to be loud. I have to be constantly talking. For me, meditation is such an important part of my life. I tell people who say they don't have time to meditate, I say, you're in a car, aren't you? You drive back and forth to work? I say, well, yes, I do that at 30 minutes each way. I say, well, how often each day do you think you spend at a red light? The person will say, well, I stop at least 6 or 7 times. I say, that's maybe 1 or 2 minutes each time. They say, yes. I'll say, what I do at red lights is I just stop because my car has come to a stop and my body is in the car, so therefore it has come to a stop. The only thing that's usually still going is my mind. All right? So I say to people, take that minute or two to close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, and make conscious contact with your source. Reconnect to your source. There's always somebody behind you to let you know when your minute is up. It never fails. All right? Most of us don't understand that this business of making conscious contact can be illustrated, and if you get it, understand it. See, I think of my source as the ocean, and I think of myself as a glass. And if I were to take this glass and I were to dip it into this ocean of abundance and say, what do I have here? What I have here is a glass of my source. Now, it's not as big, and it's not as strong, but it is still a glass of my source to which I am always connected. And if I were to take one drop of this source, and I were to put it over here, and I were to say to this drop of water, I would like you to create and sustain life. I would like you to perform miracles. I would like you to end all of my problems. And you watch that drop of water, separate from its source, you would see that it's going to change form from liquid into gas. And eventually it'll return to its source. There's no place else that it can go. There's only one source. But while this drop of water is separate from its source, it loses all of the power of its source. And this drop of water, separate from its source, is a symbol or a metaphor